Good evening, Tracy.
Yeah, good evening, Tom. Good evening, everyone. I am the co-chair of NEOACM, and this is the final day of Robotics Week, which has been a collaboration with CTES Labs, Oak Hill Collaborative, Robotics Makerspace, and us, NEOACM. We had a few Zoom meetings this week on programming sensors, and we discussed our CSI Clue Challenge update, our rationale for proceeding with our CSI Clue Challenge. And today we are interviewing Tom Atwood, the executive director of the National Robotics Education Foundation, and was the founding editor of Robot Magazine. We are very lucky today to have Tom talk to us about his career spanning many decades in radio control models and robotics, publications, and education. If you have any questions for Tom following the interview, he can address those. You can put your questions in the chat. I can read them, or you can ask Tom directly after the interview is done. Okay, so let's start. Tom, we've been really good friends for many, many years, going back to when you were the editor when we first met you. But in the last few weeks, we found out so many great, interesting things about what you've done and the things you've accomplished in your career and experiences, and finding out more about your background. So let's start the interview there. Could you give us some idea of your education and anything else you would like to tell us about yourself?
Well, just as a general overview, I have an undergraduate BA from the University of Arizona in physical anthropology. I was very interested in biology since childhood, and human evolution was a favorite topic. My older brother gave me a book on cavemen when I was like 11 years old. And as a result of that, I think, I had this enduring interest, which led to my undergraduate degree. And also, a couple of different people in my family introduced me to aerodynamics. When I was a kid, my brother showed me how to fold a paper airplane, and my grandfather, when I was 9, told me about the basic theory of pressure differential in aerodynamics to show how wings fly on airplanes. And that got me going, and it was sort of a lifelong interest, but it kind of was in the back of my mind until my late 20s, and I began getting into the hobby of radio control models, and very vigorously. And I re-engineered a Klingberg slope-soaring flying wing to be powered by the then premier cobalt brushed motor system from Astroflight. And I made a flying wing that could really roar around the sky. It had a wingspan of just over, 6 feet or so. Just a clean flying wing design. And about that time, I found out about an editorial opportunity at Air Media, which publishes model airplane news. They were looking for a new editor, and I applied, and I brought that airplane and flew it at that interview, and I was hired on the spot. And then I had a wonderful, dozen years or so at Air Age, being the editor of model airplane news, during which I also was involved in co-founding a full-scale aviation magazine. And I eventually left for a different company, and at that company, I established I founded Robot Magazine. So that's the big picture.
Great, that's wonderful. So going back a little bit, you told me about this certificate of appreciation that you got from the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, back in '91. It was a certificate of appreciation. Could you tell us about that? What was the condition in which you received that letter of appreciation?
Oh, sure. It was an interesting circumstance that was fortuitous, and there was a lot of serendipity. It all just suddenly came together. We had at NYU Media half a warehouse full of just a ton. I mean, dozens, if not hundreds, of pallets of magazines that were old magazines that we were reselling from NREF. I say we, I was an employee, and they weren't going anywhere. And so I called at the Pentagon to see. This was during Desert Storm in the Persian Gulf. I called up the Pentagon and asked whether we could give the magazines to the troops and the sailors in the Gulf. And they said, "Well, we turned down Reader's Digest and Parade magazine. I'm afraid we're going to have to turn you down as well." And so I sort of gave up after a few weeks of trying. And then I got a call from a forklift brigade officer at Dover Air Force Base. And he said, "Wait a second, I heard about this. Send me the magazines. We'll have them to the Gulf in 3 days." And so we filled up a tractor trailer truck, one of those big long haul highway trucks, completely filled it up with magazines and sent them to him. And sure enough, he had them over there in a few days. And then we began receiving Air Age at Model Airplane News, which I was editing, began receiving letters from troops and sailors in the Gulf making models. And so that was kind of a cool thing. And so, that happened, and then it went by, and then many weeks went by, and we sort of all were moving on to other things. And then suddenly this certificate rolls in, signed by then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney, congratulating me for, as he put it, the selfless volunteer service, paraphrased, and the contribution to the Gulf effort, and which was a complete shock to everybody, including me. And then I got a note from then President W. Bush following that, thanking me, for the effort. So that's how that came about, and it really was the initiative of of a forklift brigade officer at Dover Air Force Base that enabled it to happen.
And so at the time, who were you working for at the time?
I was working for Air Age. I was editor of Model Airplane News.
Okay. Yeah. What did they think when you gave them the idea of, hey, let's ship them all of these magazines? What did they think?
Well, they thought it was a great idea, and the reason was all those magazines were becoming a headache. They were intended to be resold, as old copies to hobbyists, around the world, really. But they weren't being sold. Nobody was buying them. Yeah. And so they became a headache, and there was an expense to keep them in some air conditioned place. Yeah. And so they were very delighted that we were able to make good use of them.
Yeah. What did they think when you got that certificate and that letter?
Well, that was at that point a tug of war ensued. They wanted that plaque, for their wall in their office, and I wanted it as an heirloom for my family. Absolutely. And I won the tug of war, but I think it's still a live debate.
Well, it had your name on it.
Well, I freelance in a minor kind of way for Air Age still to this day. They would love to have that back. And I sometimes wonder if I would send it back to them, but wow. So there's that.
So going back and situating what was going on back then, as far as robotics and radio controlled models. I mean, back in the 90s and the 2000s, it was all this interest in robotics, and we put a robot on Mars, and Asimov was walking around doing all this great stuff and educating the public and impressing everyone with its ability to move around and look very human-like, like an android. And then you had the Ivo dog, and you had the invention of the Roomba, bringing the robots into the home, and the first robotics competitions that were going on. So all of this activity is going on, this landscape of interest in robotics. And then you had this vision about robot magazine. So what were you thinking? How were you going to situate your magazine in the midst of all this activity And what were the first couple of publications as far as what you covered? Those first couple of ones.
Well, the idea had occurred to me in 1996. We didn't launch Robot Magazine at Maplegate Media until 2006, but a decade before I had conceived the idea and shared it only because hobby robots were coming up, and were becoming available back in the mid to late 90s. And then all these years roll by, and I leave to go work for a competitive publisher, Maplegate Media, and I orchestrated the launch of Fly RC and RC Helipilot magazines. And so, that went on for a few years, and everything was good. And then we hear, because we had friends in the industry, that there was a dinner in Nuremberg at the Nuremberg Toy Fair. And at that dinner, one of the publishers, who I have maintained good relationships with over the years, was heard to say, why don't we consider Tom's idea for a robot magazine, quote unquote. And we learned about that within 12 hours because we had friends at that very dinner table in Nuremberg. They just told us about this. And the next day, the publisher at Maplegate, where I was then working, walked in and said, they're thinking about your idea, started. So we launched the magazine at that point. And I had been thinking about robots the whole time. And it's interesting because the radio control industry pretty much morphed into the robotics industry. I mean, if you go back to the Wright brothers, all the full-scale aviation designs started with models, and hobby pursuits, and then that evolved up into the full-scale technologies. So that's kind of the big picture. And so we launched the magazine, and I was thinking, well, geez, we need a good cover. So I called up the Mythbusters, and amazingly, at their Studio 5 or something like that, and amazingly, Jamie Heineman, one of the lead Mythbusters, he and Adam Savage, ran the series. He picks up the phone, and I say, hey, we're launching a magazine on robots. Do you want to be part of it? And the next thing he was working with not only Adam Savage, but also Grant Imahara.
Okay.
Grant Imahara, Adam, and Jamie were all working together to produce the Mythbusters at that time. And they all got together and produced a cover for the launch of Robot Magazine. And because they were excited about the launch, they didn't charge us anything.
Wow.
So some of our attendees here, they may not know who the Mythbusters are. Could you kind of fill them in on their significance?
Well, they were a group of inventors and producers of interesting special effects for movies.
Yeah.
And for example, one of Jamie Heineman's assignments for a beverage vendor was to have a robotic Coke or 7-Up machine walk into the surf on a beach and disappear because it went awry. And so I was aware of them, and so I gave them a call. And they had a studio, producing not just, well, they were producing special effects for different movies, productions of all kinds. And that's what they were all about. And if you Google the Mythbusters, there are years and years of their episodes on TV doing things like blowing up cars and experimenting with ridiculous ideas. I mean, Adam Savage was noted for conceiving completely ridiculous ideas. And one of the shows, for example, they wondered whether a crash dummy could survive an explosion, and so they went out and they produced this show that was quite ridiculous, but quite funny. And so that's kind of what they were about.
So they on this cover it says they were testing a VEX robot system. How did that go?
Well, that went very well. VEX was just introducing their initial systems.
Yeah.
And that one that you see in the cover, I sent to Jamie myself. And he sent me some videos, which I'm not sure if they exist anywhere anymore, but he went into his laboratory and laid on his back on the floor and had that very robot drive over his stomach as he laid on his back. It was pretty funny. And they were interested in exploring the all new VEX technology, which was all the buzz at that time for education and robotics hobbyists. So that's why we're all over that.
Wow. What were some of the other early editions of Robot Magazine, as far as what you covered?
Well, we covered so many things. The thematically, there was educational coverage. There was also space, undersea, subterranean, surface vessels, all kinds of UAVs, ground vehicles, whatever you can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in general, how was the reception? I mean, we love Robot Magazine. So
well, thank you. That's kind of an interesting short story. The idea, when I got the go ahead to produce it, because somebody else was talking about perhaps implementing that idea, we had the first issue was a test issue. It was a one-off, newsstand experiment. There was no subscription. There was nothing like that. And so we just printed up X thousands, and threw it on the newsstand, and everybody held their breath. And the thing just sold out. It was like an immediate success.
Wow, yeah.
And so we went back and we printed more. The next, we then said, okay, we're going to do this as a quarterly. Let's see whether people will want it at that frequency. Sold out again. So then we said, okay, let's do it as a bi-monthly. And we did that. And, the subscription base was very robust. And I wanted to go monthly, but it's a funny thing. The economics in the print magazine business were such that the publisher I was with said, no, let's just keep it at bi-monthly. We can handle that. It's a lot of work, and that's keeps us busy enough, and it's a good business. So let's just do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you keep that business model? Was that, did you consistently use that subscription? Did you have to go to ads? I mean, over the years, what happened as far as that was concerned?
Well, that's kind of a bit of an involved story. I'm trying to, if I can sum it up. In the initial run of Robot Magazine issues, there were a lot of how-to stories, which really engaged the hobbyist. And then the realities of running a magazine business, which they can be harsh. We have to have ads to support the magazine. And initially we had a lot of ads from organizations like Carnegie Mellon University, VEX Robotics, in addition to ads from all kinds of commercial robotics hobby firms. And a lot of the big organizations like CMU, Carnegie Mellon, they would buy full page ads, which are thousands of bucks for a back cover or an inside cover. And the market began changing, and the economic requirements to keep the magazine healthy, to have full page ads, began driving us towards advertisements that supported vendors, commercial vendors of robotic systems, which meant we had to get a little bit away from the how-tos and a little bit more towards reviewing product. But I had to produce product reviews that were respected as objective by the readers and also appreciated by the manufacturers. And there were problems with some products, and so we had to reveal those problems, but do it in a way that somehow would reinforce the value of the product and incline the advertiser, the manufacturer, to continue advertising with it. So we walked that line, and the economics had changed from a lot of how-tos. And then about that time that we were walking that line and going to more product reviews than how-tos in the content mix, Carnegie Mellon, at one of the VEX international competitions that I attended, their top director sat down next to me, put his palm momentarily on my thigh and said, "Tom, we're pulling out." And I said, "Well, why?" Because he was a full-page advertiser. And he said, "Well, we are marketing to schools. We're concerned about education, and your magazine is not penetrating the school market." And that was a problem for us because we were selling on the newsstand to technically inclined, interested people, but we were not getting into the schools, which is a whole nother marketplace. And to market things to the school system, you've got to be an insider and fulfill the requirements as they define it. And we were not that. We were a commercial magazine going to hobbyists. And so Carnegie Mellon pulled out, and then VEX did the same thing. And so the magazine began suffering a little bit in terms of the amount of advertising we could garner. And then at that same time, the radio control industry itself began morphing and shrinking because of the exploding internet. Suddenly, all the hobbyists who were doing robots had other things to think about, including learning how to surf the net and make whatever plays they could to have fun or to build a business online. And so things began getting more difficult for the radio control magazines themselves. And then the primary RC manufacturers began collapsing. Hobbyco Great Plains in Champaign, Illinois, which was really the backbone of the radio control industry for so many years.
Yeah.
It folded. It made a bunch of acquisitions, couldn't quite keep the business going, and it fell apart. And then its divisions were absorbed by its arch competitor, Horizon Hobby. And so suddenly there was one big titan left in the hobby market to buy ads to support radio control magazines. Now, Robot was a sister publication to a couple of others, RC Car Magazine, and Fly RC that I had founded for model aviation. And the time came when the advertisers said they could no longer afford to be as generous with us in terms of advertising revenue as they had been, because the industry itself was shrinking in the face of the rising internet. And the time came when they turned away from us, and we suddenly no longer had the full page advertising support that had been part of the foundation of the radio control magazines, in addition to Robot Magazine. So the whole family of publications were in financial trouble. And at that point, Maplegate decided to pull the plug because they weren't a profitable business anymore.
Yeah.
And so Robot Magazine went down as a whole family of RC publications and books went down.
Wow. So let me throw another question related to that. So do you think that the popularity of the maker spaces and the Arduino had any impact at all on the RC market and the hobby robots at all?
That's a good question. I think so. I mean, I think that people's interests were diluted in proportion to the new opportunities to explore tinkering and, making widgets, and making robots became something of great interest. At the same time, there was a lessening in the interest in traditional radio controlled cars. I mean, it used to be, before all this came about, that you could go out on any town or city and see RC cars all over the sidewalks. That kind of went away as a part of the rising interest in the internet and, the Arduino and the other inexpensive microprocessor companies' products all were part of that sweeping change.
Yeah, so Radio Shack seemed like they kind of felt some of that same pain.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So looking back on all of those years, which publication were you the most proud of? Which, as far as Robot Magazine, as far as that is one publication that you had to be very happy about. Could you talk about that?
Well, I would say that I am most proud of creating Robot Magazine. I networked around and found the writers and recruited them, and they were very close friends. I'm in touch still with many of them, and on a daily basis.
Yes.
And so that really was where my heart was. However, years before, I mean, I spent 11 or 12 years at Air Age Media running Model Airplane News, and we launched other magazines then. Like there was one that was around for only a few years called Backyard Flyer, which was at the advent of electric flight. It used to be glow and gas for model airplanes. And then suddenly electric flight came up with LiPos and brushless motors and all that. And so I have a lot of pride about the work I did in Model Airplane News and in launching other magazines that pertain to electric flight, over the years. But really, Robot is the one that is most prominent in my recollection and in my that I'm most fond of having achieved. And it really led to everything else I've done in more recent years. I run the National Robotics Education Foundation, which exists to pursue and support technical education, STEM education in our schools.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that? How did you end up getting involved with the National Robotics Education Foundation? How did that happen?
Sure, thanks. I retired from print magazine publishing at the end of 2014. And I had been thinking about running a website on robotics and artificial intelligence, drones and all the related topics for quite a few years. And when I retired from print magazine publishing, the opportunity was wide open. The NREF, which is the acronym for the National Robotics Education Foundation, when NREF was incorporated way back in 2009, and I wasn't free to really run it as the executive director until early 2015. But when that time rolled around, I was eager and happy to do it. And it's been a real delight because, we achieve, it's a modest website by any internet standard. We receive a few to several thousand unique human viewers a month, which is a modest site, but it's led to other engagements. I am an associate editor at Kerrville Media's Robotics World division, editorial division. And I freelance there, and I've covered half a dozen exponentials since 2016, and the doors open when I seek press credentials because of the work I've done and the number of views I get on my website. And so it all is completely synergistic. And I wind up going to these events and meeting the coolest people in the leading edge of technology, and so it goes.
Yeah, so you're the executive director. What do you do as far as with that position is with the foundation?
Well, there are a couple of missions that the foundation has, and my responsibility is to facilitate the completion of those missions on an ongoing basis. And one is to point to and index to some extent robotics curricula and STEM education lesson programs and related websites. And if you go on our website and click on the curricula tab, you'll find an index of what we consider to be some of the most robust, the most primary curricula websites and sources and resources. And another thing that the website attempts to do is parade and explore and write about the coolest technology in robotics, artificial intelligence, drones, air, sea, space, ground, subterranean, and to inspire readers to want to read more and to have fun reading what we're reporting about. And so that is a secondary way of getting people to focus on STEM education, because those technology initiatives and stories that we report on are all based on STEM education.
Mm-hmm. And so why do you think the robotics education is so important to STEM and the whole public school curriculum? Why do you think it's so important?
Well, STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math is at the basis of the technological world that we live in, which is becoming more and more competitive. Yeah. And if you take a look at the culture in China and in India, in Israel, and in many other countries, there is a value placed on STEM education that is very high. And the reason is because, and this value is shared not just by educators and researchers, but by parents. It's a cultural thing, because that's the nature of the world and where we've progressed to. It's very competitive technologically. And so STEM education is essential for a nation to be competitive in today's world. And I can think of nothing better to do to support our country and our students and our educators than to pursue stories that inspire people to want to achieve technology careers and STEM-based careers, and to pursue technical education. It's an issue because STEM education is a cultural value that's very high in China and India and other countries, mm-hmm. Israel, I mean, many other countries, but it's not that valued in the US, for reasons which I can't explain. But there, I had a conversation with a Chinese intellectual who had moved to the US, who was a brilliant graduate of the University of Beijing, and she was a programmer in the US, and she was very successful, and she said she was doing programming because compared to what she had been doing in China, it was an easy and fun job. She said, Tom, we have more students just studying STEM subjects in China than you have students in the entire US studying anything and everything. And you don't have a chance in this technology competition that's ensuing. I cannot forget those.
And when did that person tell you that?
I'm sorry?
When did that person tell you that?
This was at a VEX competition, so it must have been around 2010, 2012.
Wow. Wow, that long ago. So I mean, you're absolutely right as far as the value of STEM and robotics and all that. And we've been, as a society, we've been putting a lot of promotion and money behind programs and first robotics competitions, and been doing all this for all of these years, going back to, like you said, 2010, and even back even further in 1996, maybe that's when the first robotics competitions were starting. But we are failing to fulfill what you were describing as far as getting people interested in pursuing those careers and fulfilling the Bureau of Labor Statistics need that we have as far as people going into STEM and mathematics. What are we doing wrong? We have to be doing something wrong. STEM professions, that is growing at 24%, where other fields are growing at 4%. So we really need to have that training and that education, but for some reason, students go through these programs, they go to college and they're interested, and they're not graduating enough to meet this need that we have. What is the problem as far as the states, as far as here? Other countries are able to do it, but we're failing. And that's a big question.
It's a big question. I don't have an easy answer to it. It's a cultural thing. I think it's also a matter of education, that the people who are able to change the situation, who are sufficiently well educated to really grasp what you just described, which are a lot of people, but not everybody. I mean, there's been a trend in recent years in the US to sort of coddle and acknowledge and support the concept of, well, maybe we don't need college degrees. Maybe we can just, everybody can graduate from high school and go out and get a job, and who cares? But I don't think that's the right path. Yeah, it's very frustrating.
Yeah,
yeah. Just quickly along that cultural line, if you compare the United States to others that you have, other groups that you have come in contact to in your experience, is the category of producers versus consumers relevant, in terms of robotics? Are there more countries that are more interested in consuming the robotics technology versus producing it, or vice versa? Or is everybody equally interested in the consuming aspect versus the producing aspect?
Everybody wants to consume robotics technologies because it facilitates anything you can imagine that you want to get done pretty much anymore. I mean, there are refrigerators that you can open the door, and if you have it set properly, it'll tell you what you need to buy. I mean, the robotics technology is proliferating. Everybody wants to benefit. It's the problem is the lack of that, as I see it, is the lack of a belief in the necessity for extended, good, thorough education for everybody.
Yes. Okay, so I'm gonna go to this last question when we're getting questions in the chat. You've been to a number of these robotics exhibitions. You've been doing that for years and writing about the technology. What has impressed you the most as far as the educational robotic systems and even industrial? What has just knocked your socks off that you think is really fabulous?
Well, my favorite show of the shows that I've been to is the Exponential show, which happens every year, usually around the end of April, early May. and it rotates around the whole country to different cities. And that show is I think the largest robotics and AI, compilation of so many people from so many places. It's the most diverse and comprehensive show that I know of in robotics, and that has really impressed the heck out of me. But what is the specific question?
Well, any particular technology that's coming out, anything with sensors that's impressive, mobility, robots being able to navigate, that's huge. Even though we've done a lot, the navigation is still an issue out there. Sensors are still an issue. So is there anything impressive on those fronts at all?
Well, certainly the robot systems in cars that facilitate driving, is a huge advance that's happening everywhere. And what's really interesting is the rapid and recent growth in the use of artificial intelligence, software, to make various kinds of robots better able to do whatever their functions may be across all of society, industry, civilian uses, anything you can imagine, from warehouses to mowing lawns, all that. Mm-hmm. And I think the most interesting question with respect to the artificial intelligence is, how smart can robots ultimately be? And that wanders into the discussion of whether synthetic sentience, self-aware robots are possible. And that's kind of an interesting, it's an engineering question, it's a philosophic question. And supposing we were able to develop robots that were self-aware, then you have a whole other set of questions about robots' rights. If they are individuals who have certain rights. And I think that's the most interesting technology horizon before us. And various authorities, have weighed in on this. Kurzweil's written about the singularity. Mm-hmm. And, there have been debates between him and Noam Chomsky about where that will lead and whether we will ever unite with robots in some kind of futuristic way. And then people like Elon Musk say, well, we're already on the way. If you have a cell phone in your hand, that's the beginning of it, of us converging with robotics. But the most interesting thing is, are we going to produce self-aware robots? And on this note, I was at a convention a few years ago, and I was chatting with Seth Shostak, who is the director of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, the SETI Institute. And he said that the likely very first contact that humanity will have, if we ever do have contact with a foreign alien civilization, will be through robot proxies, where our exploration robots that are artificially intelligent will communicate with theirs. And that's just kind of a fun science fiction-ish aspect of what people are supposing. But I think, all the questions surrounding whether robots will ever be sentient is a fascinating thing to pursue.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for human beings to be that, actually. You brought up Kurzweil. Didn't you interview Kurzweil for Robot Magazine?
I'm trying to remember if we had an actual one-on-one with him. I think we wound up reporting on his current musings at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like I remember that. Well, I'm gonna start feeding you some of these questions So Frank Caruso is more of a comment. I agree that we are falling behind in tech. If we spend more time in competition in tech instead of competitive sports.
Well, I'm not sure how far competitive sports are going to get us in terms of technology.
Right, right.
So I think I might certainly agree with him.
Yeah, and George Zeppelin, he said, what changed since the 1960s space race when science and math were encouraged in school? Great question.
Well, we've all watched this, and I don't know, I was part of a social milieu back then where striving to get more and more education, get the next degree, what can you do better, to perform better at school and perhaps pursue a career better that exceeds what your expectations were the previous year, and like push yourself. That was all part of the 60s culture, and it doesn't seem to be today. As we've discussed earlier in this program, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure how to approach that sociological question.
Yeah, it seemed like our culture, like back then it was about the United States making advancement, and we were competing, and we, the questioner said, it was a space race going on, and it was the pride that the United States would be at the cutting edge of making these advancements. But now it just seems like it's about, capitalism and just making money and profit.
Well, let me throw in a quick point here relative to, who was that? George Zipperman asked that question.
Yeah.
If you are a student of American business, at one point it was a point of pride for American businesses to have research and development departments where they would hire scientists, they would hire engineers, large companies like AT&T or IBM had blue sky research, and there was a certain amount of value to science and engineering for large companies because they had R&D departments. But in the 80s, I believe, there was a trend towards mergers and acquisitions where companies did not have and did not invest in R&D in their own companies much more. They just bought the company that they needed. They bought the technology they needed, bought the capability. And so we went through that a phase where we really downplayed that at the for large corporations, and then following on the back of that, we started the outsourcing and offshoring, and having some of this more challenging technical stuff done in other countries. So Tom, you're right. It's a multiplicity of factors. There's no one thing, but when we got rid of R&D as just a major staple in American corporations, that played a big part in the offshoring and outsourcing of some of this stuff played another role. So I just might throw that in there as part of the some of the factors that caused that change since the 60s.
Yep, I agree.
Well, I had another question about the technology, the advancement in the technology. How do you, when you go to a lot of these expositions, kind of talking to people and seeing what they have, determining what is truly an advancement and what is just marketing and hype? Is that difficult when you go to these expositions as these companies are showing you, their robotics and their projects? Some of that stuff is gonna look like it's real, and some of it's gonna be kind of marketing more so.
I have not had any problem with that aspect because the technologies at the shows that I have and with my partners and friends and so forth working with me that we gravitate to at these shows is always leading edge, awesome stuff. For example, at the Orlando Exponential at the end of April, one of the several firms that were there, Ghost Robotics, they have robot dogs that are more capable than what we are accustomed to having seen from Boston Dynamics. You know, Boston Dynamics has the Spot dog. Ghost Robotics has the Vision 60 dog, and it has sub-variants of different versions of them. And the Ghost Robotics dog is capable of running around outside in the desert, you know, and traversing all kinds of terrain. And it's very versatile. And you can put all these different sensors on it and make it do a lot of different interesting things. And it's likely that most big cities will have at least one of these dogs in their police and fire departments, which will in turn save the lives of police dogs and human beings in those respective departments. And that's coming. We're going to see these dogs everywhere. They can do a lot more than perimeter surveillance. You know, they can map grounds and areas. They can participate in search and rescue and all that kind of stuff. So the Ghost Robotics dog exhibit at Orlando was one of those. Another one was MARTAC, which is an acronym for Maritime Tactical something or other. They have the top robotic vessels on the planet. They're already deployed. It was not revealed to the public until relatively recently in the waters off Bahrain, and they can turn at very high Gs, and no human operator could sustain those Gs driving these things. They're totally robotic, and they are for defense and surveillance of marine environments. You know, that was an eye-opener, finding out about the MARTAC vessels. And they're coming in all sizes. They've got small ones for river inlets, and that's another eye-opener of a technology that there's no question about it being fake or silly. It's all new, and it's
so what do you think then about the Google purchase of Boston Dynamics that, you know, that were making the dog technology, and they later sold it after about four or 5 years. They sold it to SoftBank.
well, you know, I don't like to see American companies being divested or, you know, to foreign owners or purchased by them, and in one way or another becoming foreign products and bringing wealth to foreign lands, and somehow we lost what somebody had invented here. I mean, who can agree with that? No one's going to agree with that.
Yeah, but what did Google know that you know, that ABC parent company, what, you know, they bought it in 2013, and I think they turned around and sold it in 2017. Why make that move? That's where that key dog robotics technology was. That's the Boston Dynamics folks. They're the people who did that, and Google had you know, they had acquired it. So why? I'm really curious as to why they would actually sell that gold mine.
Well, I wouldn't know I would have no way of knowing the answer to that question, but I would recommend that you take a look at the Ghost Robotics technology.
Yeah.
As a counterpoint.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Okay, Frank is asking, how do you feel about the MIT robotics program?
Well, all I can say is that I think MIT is a fantastic school, and you know, full steam ahead. I'm not intimately familiar with the programs they have operating today. I have studied them in the past and reported on various of their robotics programs from time to time, but any of the top schools robotics programs I have to endorse.
Let me ask one more question about
Okay.
the robot magazine. The subscription model. Now that the internet is kind of here and the shakeup in the print industry has done whatever is done, there are magazines that are able to pull off the subscription thing at the electronic level. So do you feel that would be a valid the subscription model if you just got rid of the advertising altogether? And I'll give you, for instance, we subscribe regularly to the AAAI magazine and Intelligent Systems for IEEE. We've never let our subscriptions lapse for those two magazines, and those magazines do not have advertising. And so they're totally, membership subscription based things. Do you think there's room for, a version of Robot Magazine that is, has that kind of business model in 2022?
Well, I suppose there is if other people are doing it, but I mean, that's such a big question. I don't know how to respond.
I'm sorry.
To it. It's like, okay, what's your business plan? What are you going to do? Well,
yeah.
There are firms that are finding ways, newsletters can make money, but selling something online has been a difficult nut to crack forever.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't have any magic answers. I mean, it's a good question. I wish I had answers.
Yeah. And just said that we missed that magazine. We miss it. I think there is a vacuum.
Yes.
There's a vacuum in that space that's not being filled. I really do believe that, so that's where that question is coming from. Somewhere that the robot hobbyists and the robot enthusiasts can go, not necessarily to learn about new products, but in a community fashion, to interact with others who are also interested, and to kind of a shared kind of community periodical, if you will. There's a vacuum there in that space.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think there is, and it's going to come down to somebody having the funding or the business model concept. Some group of people with a brilliant insight as to how to do that. I'm not sure what that will be. One of the things that I was able to bring to Robot Magazine was that I got to know personally all the people who wrote for it, and I got to know personally, for example, the Mythbusters. I met them all personally at trade shows and stuff. And I had correspondence and phone calls with them on the side. And so there's a human element there.
Right.
That's important. You need a good editor who is a people person.
Right.
That's part of the glue that holds it together. And so I don't know, it's sort of a mix of things.
Okay,
Thanks.
Tom, this has been a fantastic discussion, and there's a lot of interest, and you've done a wonderful job giving us the information about your career. Is just so fascinating. I talked to you about you should write a book. You really should.
Well, I might give that a fling, but we can talk about that offline because it's a gleam in the eye at this point.
Yeah. Well, I would like to thank everyone for logging on and presenting really great questions. And thank you again, Tom, for your answers. Thank you for all of the years of providing society with this information, and what the NREF is doing is fantastic. And Robot Magazine again is missed. We have all our issues. We kept them. we go back and look at them. It's missed. It's very much missed.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a delight, a real pleasure to talk about some of the experiences and also about what might still come to pass as we look to the future. Thank you very much.
Yes, it's a lot to look forward to. It's a lot to look forward to. Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone for logging in. We will be posting this video along with the videos for our events for the week, Robotics Week, and we will send out information about where you can see the videos on our YouTube channel, and we will send out that information. So thank you very much and have a good evening.